Sometimes the things we're running from are the very things meant to find us. Sometimes a place chooses you before you ever choose it. Deep in the Wyoming frontier, a man named Caleb Stone buys an abandoned cabin for $1. He wants nothing more than peace and a place to call his own. But when he opens the door, a woman is standing there in the shadows. Her eyes tell him she's been waiting. The cabin isn't empty at all. It holds secrets that will change everything he thought he knew about himself. Why has she been living there alone, and what does she know about him that he doesn't? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Caleb Stone had always been a man more comfortable with silence than words. At 43, he'd spent the better part of 2 decades in the Wyoming wilderness, first as a trapper, then as a guide for wealthy men from back east who wanted to taste danger without actually risking much. He knew every ridge and valley within 100 miles, could read weather in the way clouds gathered over distant peaks, and preferred the company of his horse to most people he'd ever met. 3 years ago, his wife Margaret had died of fever while he was 2 weeks into the mountains with a hunting party. By the time he'd returned to their small homestead near Jackson, she'd already been buried. The guilt of not being there when she needed him most had hollowed him out in ways he couldn't explain to anyone who asked, so he stopped trying to explain. He stopped trying to connect. He simply existed, moving through the seasons like a ghost of the man he'd once been. His father, William Stone, had died the previous winter. The old man had been a surveyor and occasional prospector, always chasing one more claim, one more opportunity just over the next hill. They hadn't been close in recent years. Caleb had blamed his father for never settling down, for dragging his mother through a hard life that had worn her down before her time. But going through his father's belongings after the funeral, Caleb had found something that surprised him, a silver compass with an inscription on the back. To find your way home, first you must be lost. Your loving son, Caleb, 1869. He'd been 12 when he'd saved up for that compass, working odd jobs around town. He didn't remember his father ever mentioning it, yet here it was, carefully preserved among his most valuable possessions. The discovery had cracked something open in Caleb's chest, a regret, perhaps for time that could never be reclaimed. That compass now rested in Caleb's vest pocket as he rode through the September afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the golden grass of the high country. He was 3 days north of Jackson, following directions scrawled on a piece of paper by a county clerk who'd seemed far too eager to be rid of the information. The auction had been strange from the start. Caleb had only attended because he'd heard talk in the Mercantile about property being sold off, cheap abandoned claims, and homesteads whose owners had died without heirs or simply vanished into the territories beyond. He hadn't planned to bid on anything. He'd just been passing time, avoiding the empty rooms of his own cabin. When the auctioneer had brought up lot 47, 1 cabin and surrounding 20 acres, North Fork region, previous owner deceased, property taxes in arrears. Something had stirred in Caleb's memory. North Fork. His father had mentioned that area once, years ago, in a conversation Caleb had barely paid attention to. No one else bid. The auctioneer had looked almost relieved when Caleb raised his hand and offered $1. "Sold," the man had said quickly, as if afraid Caleb might change his mind. The clerk, who'd processed the paperwork afterward, had given Caleb an odd look, somewhere between pity and warning, but said nothing except, "It's yours now. What you do with it is your business." The trail narrowed as Caleb climbed higher into the mountains. Aspen trees shimmered gold and orange in the afternoon light, and the air carried the sharp, clean scent of coming winter. His horse, a sturdy buckskin mare named Sage, picked her way carefully over loose stones and exposed roots. They'd been traveling together for 7 years, and she knew his moods as well as any person ever had. According to the map, the cabin sat in a small valley just beyond the next ridge, sheltered by pines and near a creek that fed down from the higher peaks. Good water, good timber, and far enough from any settlement that a man could live undisturbed. That was all Caleb wanted anymore, to be undisturbed. He crested the ridge as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. Below him, the valley opened up just as the map had promised. The creek glittered like a ribbon of silver through the meadow grass, and yes, there, set back against a stand of pines, stood a cabin. It was smaller than he'd expected, built from logs that had weathered to a soft grey. The roof appeared intact, which was more than he'd hoped for. A stone chimney rose from one end, and a small porch stretched across the front, sagging slightly on one side but still standing. Behind the cabin, the forest rose thick and dark, climbing toward peaks that still held snow in their highest reaches. Something about the place felt both familiar and strange, as if he'd seen it in a dream he couldn't quite remember. Caleb shook off the feeling and urged Sage down the slope, probably just the light playing tricks, the way the long shadows fell across the meadow. As they drew closer, he noticed other details. The windows were intact, which was unusual for an abandoned property. Shutters hung straight on their hinges. The porch steps, though worn, didn't appear rotted through. Someone had cared for this place once, and not that long ago. Caleb dismounted and tied Sage to a post near the porch. The mare nickered softly, ears swiveling forward toward the cabin. He pulled his rifle from its scabbard, more habit than genuine concern, and approached the front door. The wood was solid beneath his hand when he tested it. The door was closed but not locked. He could feel his heartbeat picking up pace, though he couldn't say exactly why. This was his property now. He had every right to enter. Yet something made him hesitate, made him aware of the weight of the compass in his vest pocket, the way the light was fading faster than it should, the absolute silence of the valley around him. Caleb turned the handle and pushed the door open. The hinges made no sound. The door swung inward smoothly, revealing a dim interior that smelled of pine smoke and something else, something like lavender or sage or the dried herbs his mother used to hang in their kitchen when he was a boy. And standing in the center of the single room, backlit by the glow of a fire burning in the hearth, was a woman. She was younger than him, perhaps 30, with dark hair pulled back in a simple braid. She wore a dress that seemed decades out of fashion, calico print, faded but clean, with long sleeves and a high collar. Her hands were folded in front of her, and she stood perfectly still, as if she'd been waiting in exactly that position for a very long time. Their eyes met. Hers were dark, almost black in the firelight, and they held an expression Caleb couldn't name. Not fear, exactly. Not surprise. Something closer to relief or recognition, or perhaps both. "You're late," she said softly. Her voice was calm, measured, with a slight accent he couldn't place. "I expected you 3 days ago." Caleb's hand tightened on his rifle, though he didn't raise it. His mind raced through possibilities: squatter, madwoman, someone who'd heard about the auction and decided to claim the property first. But none of those explanations fit the way she was looking at him, or the strange certainty in her voice. "I own this cabin," he said, keeping his tone level. "Bought it legal at auction in Jackson. I don't know who you are or what you're doing here, but—" "I know who you are," she interrupted gently. She took a step forward, and the firelight caught her face more clearly. She was lovely in an old-fashioned way, with high cheekbones and a mouth that looked like it had once smiled often but had forgotten how. "You're Caleb Stone, William Stone's son. You have your father's eyes and your mother's hands." She paused, tilting her head slightly. "And you're carrying his compass. I can see the chain." Caleb's free hand moved unconsciously to his vest pocket. How could she possibly know that? How could she know any of this? "Who are you?" he asked, and this time he couldn't keep the edge from his voice. The woman smiled, but it was sad, the kind of smile that carried decades of sorrow. "My name is Elena Marsh," she said, and I've been waiting for you or someone like you for a very, very long time." Caleb didn't lower his rifle, but he didn't raise it either. He stood in the doorway, caught between the fading light behind him and the warm glow of the fire ahead, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. The woman, Elena, she'd called herself, watched him with those dark, patient eyes, as if she understood his confusion and was willing to wait for him to work through it. "My father," Caleb said slowly, "died last winter." I never heard him mention anyone named Elena Marsh. "No," she agreed. "He wouldn't have. He promised me he wouldn't speak of it to anyone. Your father was a man who kept his promises." She gestured toward a small wooden table near the fireplace. "Please, come in and close the door." The evening chill comes quickly at this elevation, and we have much to discuss. There was something in her manner, a quiet authority, a complete lack of fear that made Caleb feel like the intruder rather than the property owner. Against his better judgment, he stepped inside and closed the door behind him. He kept the rifle in his hands, but pointed it toward the floor. The cabin's interior was simple but well-maintained. A narrow bed stood against one wall, neatly made with what looked like hand-sewn quilts. Shelves held a modest collection of books, jars of preserved food, and various household items. The table had 2 chairs, and Elena moved to sit in one, leaving the other for him. "I'm not in the habit of sitting down with strangers in my own property," Caleb said, though even as he spoke, he realized how strange his claim sounded. This woman had clearly been living here, and living here comfortably, for some time. "Then let me make us less strange to each other," Elena said. She reached into a pocket of her dress and withdrew something small, which she placed on the table. "Come closer. I want you to see this." Curiosity overcame caution. Caleb moved to the table and looked down at what she'd placed there. It was a photograph, old and faded, the kind taken with the early cameras that required long exposures and careful positioning. The image showed 2 people standing in front of this very cabin. He recognized the distinctive stone chimney and the shape of the porch. One of the people in the photograph was a young man, perhaps in his late 20s, wearing a surveyor's vest and holding what appeared to be measuring equipment. The other was a woman in a calico dress with dark hair pulled back in a braid. Caleb's breath caught. The man in the photograph was his father. He'd seen enough old pictures to recognize William Stone's features, the particular way he stood, the confident set of his shoulders. But that wasn't what made Caleb's hands suddenly feel cold. The woman in the photograph was Elena, the same woman sitting across from him right now. Not similar, identical. The same face, the same eyes, even the same dress. "This photograph," Elena said quietly, "was taken in the summer of 1952, 73 years ago." Caleb set the rifle down on the table, not because he felt safe, but because his hands had started shaking. "That's impossible." "Yes," Elena agreed, "it should be, yet here we are." He picked up the photograph, brought it closer to his face, searching for signs of forgery or trick photography. But the image was genuine. He could see that in the texture of the paper, the quality of the light, the way the shadows fell. And his father looked exactly as he did in other photographs, from that era, photographs Caleb had seen in family albums. "Who are you?" he asked again, and this time the question carried a different weight. Elena folded her hands on the table. "I was born in 1871, in a small town in Pennsylvania. I married a man named Thomas Marsh in 1888, and we came west together, chasing stories of gold and new beginnings. He built this cabin in 1889. He died in a mining accident in 1890. I was 19 years old and pregnant with our daughter." She paused, her gaze distant. Caleb pulled out the chair and sat down heavily. His mind felt like it was moving through deep water, slow and uncertain. "You're saying you're over 150 years old." 154, she corrected. "Though I've stopped counting with much interest, time has a different meaning when you can't escape it." "This is madness," Caleb said, But even as he spoke, he was remembering things. His father's odd silences whenever anyone mentioned the North Fork region. The way he'd sometimes stare at the mountains with an expression of what looked like guilt or obligation. The compass, carefully preserved. The fact that the cabin had been sold for $1, as if someone needed it to pass to the right person. Elena reached across the table and gently took the photograph from his hands. Your father came here in 1952. He was surveying land for the railroad, mapping routes through the mountains. He got lost in a storm and stumbled upon this cabin. I gave him shelter, fed him, and sent him on his way. But before he left, he saw things that convinced him my situation was real. He promised me that if he could ever help, he would. He promised that if he couldn't, he would make sure someone from his family knew where to find me. Help with what? Caleb asked. His voice sounded hollow in his own ears. Elena stood and moved to the fireplace. She stared into the flames for a long moment before speaking. After Thomas died, I was alone and desperate. I had a daughter, Sarah, and no means to support her. The land was valuable, but I couldn't work a claim by myself. Men came, bad men, saying I owed debts Thomas had accumulated. They wanted the property. They threatened to take Sarah from me. She turned back to face him. There was a man, a medicine man, from the Shoshone people who sometimes traded in these mountains. I sought him out. I begged him for help, for protection, for a way to keep my daughter safe. He told me there was power in this land, old power, and that I could make a bargain with it, so I did. What kind of bargain? Caleb's throat felt dry. I became the guardian of this place, Elena said simply. In exchange for protection for Sarah, I agreed to watch over the land, to keep it safe from those who would exploit it for greed. The power, whatever it is, stopped me from aging. It bound me to this cabin and the surrounding valley. I could leave for short periods, but never far, and never for long. And it promised that when the time was right, when my bloodline returned to claim what was rightfully theirs, I would be free. Caleb shook his head. This is impossible. Magic doesn't exist. Curses and bargains with the land, those are just stories. Are they? Elena moved back to the table and sat down. Then how do you explain what you see before you? How do you explain that photograph? How do you explain the fact that this cabin has stood for over a century in perfect repair, despite being abandoned according to your county records? She leaned forward, and he could see the weight of decades in her eyes. I'm not asking you to understand it, Caleb. I'm only asking you to help me. Your father promised he would try to find my daughter's descendants. He came back twice more over the years, bringing what information he could gather. The last time was 15 years ago. He told me he was getting old, that his health was failing, but that he had a son who would know where to find me when the time came. I didn't know, Caleb said quietly. He never told me anything about this. Because he wanted to protect you, Elena said, and because he wasn't sure you'd believe him. Would you have? If your father had told you this story while he was alive, would you have believed a word of it? Caleb thought about that. He thought about the man his father had been practical, grounded, not given to flights of fancy. If William Stone had told him about a woman who didn't age, a cabin protected by old magic, Caleb would have assumed the old man was losing his mind. But he couldn't deny what he was seeing now. Couldn't deny the photograph, or Elena's knowledge of his family, or the strange sense of rightness he felt sitting here, as if this moment had always been inevitable. What happened to your daughter? He asked finally. Pain flickered across Elena's face. The bargain protected her from the men who threatened us, but it couldn't keep her with me. The same power that bound me to this place pushed her away. She grew frightened of me when she realized I wasn't aging like other mothers. When she was 16, she left, went back east to live with my sister's family. I never saw her again, though your father found records showing she married, had children of her own, lived a full life. And you've been here alone all this time. Yes, Elena said, waiting, hoping, The bargain specified that I would be freed when my bloodline returned to claim the land. But none of Sarah's descendants ever came back. They didn't know this place existed, didn't know what they were owed, until your father bought the property at auction years ago, intending to pass it to one of them. But he died before he could complete the transfer. Caleb's hand moved to his vest pocket, feeling the shape of the compass through the fabric. And now it's passed to me. Yes, Elena said, not by accident, I think. The land itself has a way of bringing the right people together. You bought this cabin for $1, Caleb Stone. No one else bid, no one else wanted it. Don't you find that strange? He did find it strange. He'd found everything about this strange from the moment he'd heard about the auction. What do you need from me? He asked. Elena's expression softened with something that might have been hope. Help me find them. Sarah's descendants. They're out there somewhere. Your father's research suggested they're not far from here. Find them. Bring them to this place. Help them understand their inheritance. If one of them willingly accepts this land as their own, if they claim it with full knowledge of what it means, the bargain will be complete. I'll be free to age naturally, to live what remains of my life as I should have lived it, and they'll have what rightfully belongs to them. Caleb looked around the cabin again, seeing it with new eyes. This wasn't just a property, it was a prison and a trust, a responsibility that had stretched across generations. And if I refuse, he asked, if I just walk away? Then I'll remain here, Elena said simply, as I have been, as I will be, perhaps forever. And you'll carry the weight of your father's broken promise for the rest of your life. She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the darkening valley. But I don't think you'll refuse, Caleb Stone. You came here seeking solitude, seeking escape from pain. But some things can't be escaped. Some things have to be faced and healed and set right. Your father understood that. I think you do too. Caleb sat in silence for a long moment, feeling the compass against his chest, hearing his father's voice in his memory. To find your way home, first you must be lost. Maybe he'd been lost longer than he realized. Maybe this strange, impossible situation was exactly what he needed to find his way back to something resembling purpose. I'll help you, he said finally. I don't understand any of this, and I'm not sure I believe all of it, but I'll help you. Elena turned from the window, and for the first time since he'd entered the cabin, she truly smiled. It transformed her face, made her look young and alive in a way that the firelight alone couldn't explain. Thank you, she said. Your father would be proud. Outside, night had fallen completely over the valley. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled and the shadows danced, and Caleb Stone found himself committed to a promise he didn't fully understand, for a woman who shouldn't exist, in pursuit of a freedom that defied everything he thought he knew about the world. But somehow it felt right. Caleb left Jackson before dawn, leading the pack mule laden with supplies. The encounter with Marcus Dalton had left him unsettled, and he wanted to warn Elena before things went any further. The ride back to the cabin took most of the day, and the sun was beginning its descent when he finally entered the familiar valley. Elena was waiting on the porch, as if she'd sensed his approach. She looked relieved to see him, though worry creased her brow. You look troubled, she said as he dismounted. We need to talk about the Dalton family, Caleb replied, unloading supplies. One of them approached me in Jackson, made an offer to buy the property. Elena's face went pale. She gripped the porch railing as if she might fall without its support. Marcus, you know him? I know of him. His great-great-grandfather was Silas Dalton, the man I told you about, the one who claimed Thomas owed him money, who tried to force me off this land. She moved back into the cabin, and Caleb followed. How much did he offer? $600. When I refused, he got persistent, mentioned his family's been trying to acquire this property for years. Elena sat down heavily at the table. They're still looking for it then, after all this time. Looking for what? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, Her voice was barely above a whisper. Before Thomas died, he found something. A gold vein, small but pure, hidden in the rocks upstream from the cabin. He told only me about it, said we'd keep it secret until we had the means to work it properly. He was careful, smart. He knew men like Silas Dalton would kill for that kind of find. And Dalton found out somehow. Thomas hired him for labor on the claim, just general work. Silas must have suspected something, seen something. A week later, there was an accident at the mine. A support beam gave way. Thomas was killed. Elena's hands clenched into fists. It was no accident. I knew it then, and I know it now. Silas Dalton murdered my husband for gold he thought was hidden on this property. Caleb leaned against the wall, processing this. So, when you made the bargain, you weren't just protecting Sarah, you were protecting the land itself. Yes. The medicine man told me the gold was sacred to his people, that it should remain in the earth. But I was desperate, not thinking clearly. I agreed to become its guardian, in exchange for protection from men like Silas. The power bound me here, but it also kept the Daltons from ever finding what they sought. Every time they tried to search, something would go wrong. Accidents, illness, misfortune. Eventually, they gave up coming near the property themselves. Until now, Caleb said, until it was sold at auction and passed to someone outside their reach. Elena nodded. The binding has limits. It protects the land and me, but it can't control what happens beyond the valley. If Marcus has legal claim to this property, if he owns it, the protection might not hold, but he doesn't own it. I do. Caleb pulled out the deed from his saddlebag, and according to my father's research, Emma Walsh has the rightful claim through her bloodline. The Daltons stole this from your family. Stolen or not, they've held influence in this territory for generations. Marcus's family owns half the land between here and Jackson. They have money, connections, legal resources. Elena looked up at him with worried eyes. If they discover what you're trying to do, bringing Emma here, transferring the deed, they'll find ways to stop it. Let them try, Caleb said, though even he heard the bravado in his voice. Elena stood and moved to a loose board near the fireplace. She pried it up and reached into the hollow space beneath, pulling out something wrapped in oilcloth. When she unwrapped it, Caleb saw a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. Thomas drew this before he died, she said, spreading it on the table. It's a map showing the location of the gold vein. I've kept it hidden all these years, never showing it to anyone, not even your father. But if the Daltons are moving against us, you need to know what they're after. Caleb studied the map. It showed the cabin, the creek, and the surrounding terrain in surprising detail. About a quarter-mile upstream, marked with an X, was the location Thomas Marsh had indicated. The notation beside it read, 20 feet down, northern wall, pure vein, 40 pounds or more. 40 pounds of pure gold. At current prices, that would be worth thousands of dollars. Enough to kill for, certainly. Enough to justify a century of searching. Why didn't you ever mine it yourself? Caleb asked. Even just enough to live on. Because I made a promise, Elena said. To the land, to the power that protects this place. The gold stays in the earth. That was the condition. If I break it, the binding breaks. I would age and die in moments. All the years I've been holding back would catch up at once. And if Emma claims the land, does the same binding apply to her? No. Once the land passes to my bloodline with full knowledge and acceptance, the bargain is fulfilled. The gold would be hers to do with as she pleases. The protective power would fade, and I would be released. Elena refolded the map carefully. But that also means the Daltons would be free to make their move. If they learn Emma has accepted the inheritance, she'll become their target. Caleb pulled out the telegram from Emma Walsh. She's agreed to meet me on Saturday. That gives us 2 days to figure out how to protect her when the time comes. You should tell her everything, Elena said. About me, about the gold, about the danger. She deserves to know what she's stepping into. I will. But first, I need to know she's someone we can trust. Someone who won't turn around and sell to the Daltons the moment she realizes what's at stake." Elena smiled faintly. "She's Sarah's blood. My blood. I have to believe that counts for something." They spent the evening going over the details Caleb would need to convince Emma Walsh. Elena shared more stories about Sarah, her laugh, her kindness, her stubbornness when she believed in something. She pulled out a locket from around her neck, inside which was a tiny portrait of Sarah as a young girl and a lock of her hair. "Give this to Emma," Elena said, pressing the locket into Caleb's hand. "Let her see her great-great-grandmother's face. Let her know this is real." Caleb turned the locket over in his palm. It was simple gold, worn smooth by years of Elena touching it. The portrait inside showed a girl of perhaps 10, with dark eyes and a serious expression. "What if she doesn't believe me?" Caleb asked. "What if she thinks I'm trying to swindle her?" "Then we wait," Elena said. "We keep trying until we find a way to make her understand. But I don't think that will happen. If she's anything like Sarah, she'll feel the truth of it, even if her mind resists." That night, Caleb lay in his bedroll by the fire, watching the flames dance while Elena sat in the rocking chair near the window. She was humming something, a lullaby, perhaps, from a time before his grandparents were born. The sound was both beautiful and haunting, a reminder of all the years she'd spent alone in this valley, waiting for a promise to be fulfilled. He thought about his own solitude, the 3 years he'd spent running from grief and guilt. What Elena had endured made his suffering seem brief and insignificant. Yet she'd never given up hope that someday someone would come to free her. "Why didn't you give up?" he asked quietly. "After decades, with no sign that anyone would ever come, why did you keep hoping?" Elena stopped humming. "Because the alternative was despair," she said simply. "And I'd already lost too much to let despair have what was left of me, so I chose to believe. Every day I chose to believe that tomorrow might be the day, and now finally it might actually be true." Caleb closed his eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over him like a blanket. This wasn't just about helping a strange woman or honoring his father's promise anymore. It was about giving someone back their life, their freedom, their chance to live and die as they were meant to. And he would do it, no matter what the Daltons tried. He would do it because it was right, and because somewhere along the way he'd started to care about Elena Marsh, this impossible woman who'd waited more than a century for someone to keep a promise. Tomorrow he would ride to Redemption Creek. Tomorrow he would meet Emma Walsh and hope she had her great-great-grandmother's courage. Tomorrow he would begin the process of setting right something that had been wrong for far too long. But tonight he would rest in this cabin that existed outside normal time, listening to a woman who should not be alive sing songs from an age long past, and feel something he hadn't felt in years, the sense that he was exactly where he needed to be. Morning came too quickly. Caleb woke to find Elena already preparing breakfast, moving about the cabin with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd performed these tasks thousands of times. The sight stirred something in him, a memory of Margaret doing the same, the comfortable domestic rhythm they'd shared. He sat up, running a hand through his hair. "You should have woken me. I could have helped." "You need your strength for the journey ahead," Elena said, not turning from the stove. "Besides, it gives me something to do. These hands have grown tired of idleness." They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from understanding rather than lack of words. Caleb found himself watching Elena more closely this morning, noticing details he'd missed before. The way her fingers moved, graceful despite their age. The slight sadness that never quite left her eyes, even when she smiled, the careful way she held herself, as if she'd learned long ago not to expect comfort or ease. "Tell me about your wife," Elena said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. "What was she like?" Caleb set down his fork, surprised by the question but not unwilling to answer. "She could fix almost anything, furniture, clothes, even my terrible moods." He smiled at the memory. "We met at a church, social. I was 25, she was 23. She laughed at something I said, and I was done for. How long were you married? 15 years. Good years. Mostly. We never had children, though we wanted them. That was a sorrow we shared. Caleb picked up his coffee cup, needing something to do with his hands. When she died, I felt like I'd failed her in every possible way. Failed to give her children, failed to be there when she needed me, failed to protect her from something as simple as a fever. Elena reached across the table and touched his hand. Her skin was cool, smooth. Grief has a way of twisting truth into blame. But tell me, did she love you? Yes, Caleb said without hesitation. She did. And did you love her? With everything I had. Then you didn't fail her, Elena said gently. You gave her what mattered most. The rest, children, being present at the exact moment of death, those are things we can't always control. Life doesn't wait for us to be ready. It simply happens. Caleb felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the tight knot he'd carried for 3 years. How did you survive it? Losing Thomas, losing Sarah, all those years alone? Elena withdrew her hand and looked out the window at the morning light. Some days I didn't survive it well. Some days I simply existed, going through the motions, waiting for time to pass. But I learned that survival doesn't require happiness. It just requires waking up and making a choice to continue. That's not living, though. That's just enduring. True, Elena agreed. But sometimes enduring is enough to get you through to the other side, where living becomes possible again. She turned back to him. You've been enduring, Caleb. It's time to start living again. He wanted to argue, to insist that he wasn't ready, but the words wouldn't come, because she was right. He'd been half alive for 3 years, going through motions, avoiding anything that might require him to feel deeply again. Caleb stood and began gathering his things for the journey. As he did, he noticed his hand brushing against his vest pocket, feeling for the wedding ring he'd carried there since Margaret's death. He pulled it out, a simple gold band, worn thin from years of wear. I've been carrying this everywhere, he said, holding it up to the light. Like if I let it go, I'd be letting her go. Elena moved to stand beside him. Carrying someone's memory is different from carrying their death. One honors them, the other imprisons you both. Caleb closed his hand around the ring, feeling its familiar weight. Then, making a decision that felt both terrifying and right, he walked to the shelf where Elena kept her few precious things. He placed the ring there, next to the photograph of Sarah. I'm not forgetting her, he said quietly. I'm just not letting the guilt define me anymore. Elena's smile was warm, genuine. She would be proud of you. They spent the next hour going over final preparations. Elena gave Caleb the locket with Sarah's portrait, along with some papers she'd kept, birth records, marriage certificates, anything that might help prove the family connection to Emma Walsh. She also gave him specific instructions about what to tell Emma, what to hold back until they met in person. The most important thing, Elena said as Caleb prepared to leave, is that she comes here willingly. She has to see this place, feel it, understand what it means. The land itself will help her believe if she's open to it. And if she's not, then we'll find another way. But I don't think that will be necessary. Sarah always said she felt drawn to the mountains, that she heard them calling to her in dreams. If Emma has even a trace of that same gift, she'll recognize this place. Caleb mounted Sage, adjusting his hat against the morning sun. He looked down at Elena, standing on the porch, and for a moment he saw her not as the ageless woman trapped by an impossible bargain, but simply as someone who deserved freedom, who'd earned it through decades of patience and hope. I'll bring her back, he promised, whatever it takes. I know you will, Elena said. Be careful, Caleb. The Daltons won't have stopped watching you. If they realize where you're going and why, they'll try to intervene. Let them try, Caleb said. And this time there was no bravado in his voice, only quiet determination. He rode away from the cabin without looking back, afraid that if he did, he might lose his nerve. The journey to Redemption Creek would take 2 days of hard riding, and he needed to make good time. Saturday afternoon was fast approaching, and Emma Walsh was waiting for answers he wasn't entirely sure how to give. But he would figure it out. Because somewhere along the way, this mission had become about more than keeping his father's promise. It had become about Elena's freedom, Emma's inheritance, and perhaps most importantly, his own redemption. The mountains rose around him as he rode, ancient and patient, holding their secrets close. Somewhere in those peaks was the gold that had started all of this. The reason Thomas Marsh had died, the reason Elena had been trapped, the reason the Daltons still searched after more than a century. But gold was just metal. It was the people, the connections, the promises, the love that transcended time that truly mattered. And for the first time in years, Caleb Stone understood that he was part of something larger than his own grief, something worth fighting for. He touched his vest pocket where the compass rested, then urged Sage into a steady trot. There were miles to cover, and a woman to convince, and a future to secure. And he would not fail. Caleb had been on the trail for less than an hour when he heard horses behind him. He didn't need to look back to know who it was. The Daltons had been watching, just as Elena had warned. They'd waited for him to leave the cabin, probably assuming he was heading to town for supplies or business. But now they were coming, and they were coming fast. He urged Sage into a gallop, but the mare was carrying full gear and couldn't maintain top speed for long. The riders behind him were gaining, and there were at least 3 of them by the sound of it. Caleb veered off the main trail, heading into rougher country, where his knowledge of the terrain might give him an advantage. The chase continued for another 20 minutes, before Caleb realized he couldn't outrun them. He found a defensive position among some rocks and dismounted, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. When the riders came around the bend, he had the high ground and clear lines of sight. Marcus Dalton was leading them, as Caleb had expected. With him were 2 rough-looking men, the kind you hired when you needed things done that wouldn't stand up to legal scrutiny. They reined in their horses when they saw Caleb's position. "That's far enough," Caleb called out. Marcus raised his hands in a gesture of peace, though his smile was anything but peaceful. "Mr. Stone, there's no need for hostility. We just want to talk. You could have talked in Jackson. You didn't need to chase me into the mountains." "True, but I didn't realize the urgency of the situation then." Marcus dismounted slowly, his men staying mounted and alert. "I've done some checking on you, Mr. Stone. Interesting timing. You purchasing that property right after your father's death, almost as if he'd told you something about it before he passed." Caleb kept his rifle steady. "My father's business is my business, not yours. But it becomes my business when you start asking questions about the Walsh family, about Emma Walsh specifically." Marcus took a few steps forward, careful to keep his movements non-threatening. Redemption Creek is a small town. Word travels when a stranger sends telegrams asking about family histories. Caleb's jaw tightened. The telegraph operator must have talked, probably for a few coins from Dalton's men. "So now you know I'm looking into property rights," Caleb said. "That still doesn't explain why you're following me." "Because that land should be mine," Marcus said, and for the first time, real anger colored his voice. "My family has been trying to secure it for generations. Do you have any idea how frustrating it is to know something valuable is just out of reach, protected by legal complications and superstitious nonsense?" "Superstitious nonsense," Marcus laughed, but it was a bitter sound. The stories about that place, bad luck, accidents, mysterious circumstances keeping people away. My great-great-grandfather tried to work that land after Thomas Marsh died. He brought in crews, equipment, everything needed to extract what was there. Every single attempt failed. Men got sick, equipment broke, accidents happened. Eventually he gave up, convinced the place was cursed. "Maybe it is," Caleb said. "I don't believe in curses, Mr. Stone. I believe in gold, and I believe in property rights. Whatever's hidden on that land belongs to whoever has the legal claim to it. And I intend to have that claim through Emma Walsh, Caleb said, understanding dawning. You're not trying to buy the property from me. You're planning to go through her. Marcus smiled again. Emma Walsh is a schoolteacher living on modest means. When she learns she has a valuable inheritance waiting for her, I suspect she'll be very interested in accepting a generous offer from someone who can actually develop the property. Unlike you, I have the resources to work whatever's there properly. One of Marcus's hired men shifted in his saddle, his hand moving toward his gun. Caleb swung his rifle toward him. I wouldn't. Easy, Marcus said, holding up a hand to his man. We're not here for violence. I'm simply trying to make you understand the situation. You can help me reach Emma Walsh, explain the inheritance to her, and facilitate a sale. In return, I'll make sure you're compensated handsomely. Or you can try to play hero, get in my way, and watch everything fall apart around you. There's a third option, Caleb said. I complete what my father started. Emma Walsh gets what's rightfully hers, and you go back to Jackson empty-handed. Marcus's expression hardened. Then you're a fool. Emma Walsh doesn't know that land. She doesn't know what's at stake, but I do. And I'm not the patient man my ancestors were. If you insist on interfering. The crack of breaking wood interrupted him. Behind Marcus, the ground itself seemed to shift. One of the hired men shouted as his horse reared, nearly throwing him. The rocks around them began to tremble, small stones skittering down the slope. What the hell? Marcus staggered, trying to keep his balance. Caleb felt it too, a deep vibration through the earth, as if the mountain itself was waking. Then he understood. Elena. The protective power that bound her to the land extended beyond the immediate valley. It was responding to the threat Marcus represented, just as it had responded to every threat the Daltons had ever posed. The trembling intensified. One of the hired men's horses bolted, throwing its rider. Marcus was backing toward his horse, his earlier confidence replaced by something closer to fear. "This is your doing," Marcus shouted at Caleb. "What did you do?" "Nothing," Caleb said truthfully. "The land doesn't want you here. It never has." A crack appeared in the ground between them, widening rapidly. Marcus lunged for his horse and pulled himself into the saddle. His remaining hired man was already riding away, and Marcus followed, casting one last look back at Caleb. "This isn't over," he shouted. "You can't hide behind superstition forever." Then they were gone, racing back down the trail toward safer ground. The trembling subsided gradually, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Caleb lowered his rifle and looked around at the changed landscape. The crack in the ground had stopped widening, but it was still there, a clear warning of what would happen to anyone who threatened what the land protected. He remounted Sage and continued toward Redemption Creek, but now he rode with even greater urgency. Marcus Dalton knew about Emma Walsh, knew Caleb was trying to reach her. The man would likely beat Caleb there, would try to reach Emma first with his own version of events. Caleb pushed Sage as hard as he dared, stopping only briefly to rest and water the horse. He rode through the night, guided by moonlight and memory, until the exhaustion made him sway in the saddle. He made camp for a few hours before dawn, then continued as soon as light broke. He reached Redemption Creek late Friday evening, dusty and exhausted. The town was small, a main street with a general store, saloon, church, and schoolhouse. Caleb found lodging at a small hotel and asked about Emma Walsh. "Schoolteacher," the hotel clerk said, "lives in the apartment above the schoolhouse. Nice lady, keeps to herself mostly. Has anyone else been asking about her recently?" The clerk thought for a moment. "Now that you mention it, yes. A well-dressed gentleman came through yesterday, asked similar questions, said he was a cousin or some such." Caleb's stomach sank. Marcus had already been here. The question was whether he'd already spoken to Emma or was waiting to intercept her before Caleb's scheduled meeting. Caleb spent a restless night in the hotel room, his mind racing through possibilities. In the morning, He cleaned up as best he could, trying to look presentable despite the hard travel. He checked his pocket watch, 11 in the morning. 3 hours until his meeting with Emma. He decided not to wait. He walked to the schoolhouse and knocked on the side door that led to the upstairs apartment. After a moment, a woman answered. She was in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and intelligent brown eyes that studied him carefully. "Mr. Stone?" she asked. "Miss Walsh, I apologize for coming early, but there are complications I need to discuss with you before our scheduled meeting." Emma glanced past him at the street, then stepped back to let him enter. "You'd better come in. Someone else has been asking questions about me, and I have a feeling it's related to your message." She led him up narrow stairs to a modest apartment, a sitting room, small kitchen, and presumably a bedroom beyond. Books lined every available wall, and papers covered a writing desk near the window. Emma gestured to a chair and sat across from him. "Tell me why you're really here," she said, "and please don't insult my intelligence with half-truths. A strange man sending telegrams about family history doesn't ride all the way from Jackson just for a pleasant conversation." Caleb pulled out the locket Elena had given him and placed it on the table between them. "This belonged to your great-great-grandmother, Elena Marsh. Inside is a portrait of your great-grandmother, Sarah Wheeler, when she was 10 years old." Emma picked up the locket carefully, opening it. Her breath caught when she saw the portrait. "Where did you get this?" "From Elena herself," Caleb said. "She's still alive, Miss Walsh, and she's been waiting over a century to meet you." Emma's eyes snapped up to his face, searching for signs of deception or madness. "That's impossible, I know, but it's true." Caleb leaned forward. "I'm going to tell you something that will sound impossible, and I need you to listen to all of it before you decide I'm insane. Can you do that?" Emma set the locket down but kept her hand on it. "I'm listening." And so Caleb began to tell her the story, all of it. The cabin, the photograph, his father's promise, the bargain Elena had made. He told her about the gold, about the Daltons, about the protective power that had kept Elena trapped and the land guarded for more than 100 years. Emma listened in silence, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. "The man who came yesterday," she said finally. "He told me a different story. Said you were a con artist, trying to swindle me out of a valuable inheritance. Said the land was worthless, but that you'd convinced some old woman to help you perpetrate a fraud." "That man was Marcus Dalton," Caleb said. "His family murdered Elena's husband to steal that land. They've been searching for the gold for over a century. And you're asking me to believe that my great-great-grandmother, who should be long dead, is somehow still alive and waiting for me in a magic cabin." Emma turned back to face him. "Do you understand how that sounds?" "I do, but I'm asking you to come see for yourself. Ride back with me to the valley, meet Elena, see the cabin. If it's all lies, you can walk away. But if it's truth, and I swear to you it is, then you have the power to free a woman who's been trapped far too long and to claim what's rightfully yours." Emma picked up the locket again, staring at the portrait inside. "I've had dreams," she said quietly, "ever since I was a girl, dreams of a cabin in the mountains and a woman calling to me. I always thought they were just dreams, just my imagination." "They weren't," Caleb said. "Elena has been reaching out the only way she could, through the blood connection, through dreams. She's been calling you home." Emma closed the locket and held it to her chest. "If you're lying to me, Mr. Stone, I'll make sure you regret it." "I'm not lying," Caleb said. "Will you come?" Emma looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes, but we leave tonight, before Marcus Dalton can interfere." "And Mr. Stone?" "I'll be bringing my father's rifle." Caleb smiled despite his exhaustion. "That's probably wise, Miss Walsh. That's probably very wise indeed." The mine shaft was exactly where Caleb remembered a dark opening in the mountainside, partially concealed by brush and fallen timbers. He checked it carefully before allowing Elena and Emma inside. The structure was sound enough, the main tunnel extending about 30 feet before ending in a collapse. It would shelter them from the cold and hide them from casual searching. Emma helped Elena settle near the entrance where fresh air could reach them. Caleb built a small, smokeless fire, using dry wood and careful arrangement enough to provide warmth, but not enough to draw attention from below. They had some dried meat and hardtack in Caleb's saddlebags, which they shared in silence. Elena's breathing had improved once they stopped moving, but she still looked drawn and pale in the firelight. Emma watched her with concern, holding the older woman's hand. "How much farther can you go from the cabin?" Emma asked gently. "I don't know," Elena admitted. "The farthest I ever traveled was perhaps half a day's ride, and even that left me weak for a week afterward." She managed a small smile. "But I'm here now, with my family. That gives me strength I didn't know I had." Caleb kept watch at the mine entrance, studying the valley below. He could see the lights of Marcus's search parties moving through the forest, but they were searching randomly, without clear direction. They hadn't found the trail yet. "They'll find us eventually," he said. "By tomorrow at the latest. We need a plan." Emma moved to join him at the entrance. "What if we give Marcus what he wants?" Caleb turned to her sharply. "You'd sell the land?" "No," Emma said. "But we could use the gold as bait, lead him away from Elena, away from the cabin. If he thinks he can get what he really wants, he might be willing to negotiate." Plus one realize, forever, "Marcus Dalton doesn't negotiate," Elena said from deeper in the mine. "His family never has. They take what they want through force or legal manipulation. They'll never accept Emma's rightful claim while they believe they can contest it." "Then we need leverage," Caleb said, "something that makes it impossible for them to contest." Emma pulled out the leather pouch of gold samples. "What if we had proof that the Daltons knew about Thomas's murder, that they covered it up? That would destroy their claim and their reputation." "After 130 years?" Caleb shook his head. "Any evidence is long gone." "Not all of it," Elena said quietly. Both Caleb and Emma turned to look at her. She was reaching into her dress pocket, pulling out something wrapped in oilcloth. Thomas kept a journal. The last entry was written the day before he died. He recorded everything: Silas Dalton's threats, the suspicious accidents, his fear that Dalton would kill him for the gold claim. She unwrapped the package to reveal a small leather-bound book, remarkably preserved despite its age. "I couldn't bear to look at it for decades after Thomas died, but I kept it safe, knowing someday it might matter." Caleb took the journal carefully. Even in the dim firelight, he could make out the careful handwriting on the yellowed pages. He opened it to the last entry, dated the 7th of October, 1890. "If anything happens to me, let it be known that Silas Dalton has threatened my life repeatedly over the claim. He believes there is gold on this property, and he has made clear he will do whatever necessary to possess it. I fear for Elena and Sarah. I have hidden proof of the claim in a place only Elena knows. May God protect my family if I cannot." "This is it," Emma breathed. "This is the evidence we need." "Written by a dead man over a century ago," Caleb said. "We'd need more than this to convince a court." "We don't need a court," Elena said, pulling herself to her feet with effort. "We need Marcus to believe we have enough evidence to destroy his family's legacy. Men like him care more about reputation than they do about gold. If he thinks we can prove his great-great-grandfather was a murderer, that the entire Dalton fortune was built on theft and violence, he'll have to reconsider his position." A sound outside made them all freeze. Footsteps coming up the slope. Multiple people, trying to move quietly but making inevitable noise on the loose rock. They'd been found. Caleb grabbed his rifle and positioned himself at the mine entrance. Emma did the same with her father's gun. Elena moved back deeper into the shaft, clutching the talisman she'd worn for over a century, a small carved stone on a leather cord. "Miss Walsh," Marcus's voice came from the darkness. "I know you're in there. Come out and let's talk like reasonable people." "We have nothing to talk about," Emma called back. "This is my land, my inheritance. You have no claim to it. I have 6 armed men and legal documentation saying your great-great-grandmother abandoned that property in 1891. Marcus replied. "The law is on my side, Miss Walsh. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "We have documentation too," Caleb shouted. "Thomas Marsh's journal detailing your great-great-grandfather's threats and intentions. We have proof Silas Dalton murdered an innocent man for this land." There was a long pause. Then Marcus's voice came again, harder now. "That's a lie. You can't prove anything." "Can't we?" Emma held up the journal so it caught the firelight, visible from outside. Thomas Marsh's own words, written the day before he died, along with testimony from the only witness who survived, Elena Marsh herself. Another pause, longer this time. Then Marcus laughed, though it sounded forced. "Elena Marsh has been dead for over 100 years. You expect anyone to believe otherwise? Why don't you come in and see for yourself?" Elena's voice rang out clear and strong from the depths of the mine. "Come face to face with the woman your ancestor tried to destroy. The woman who's been waiting all this time to see justice done." Silence fell over the mountainside. Caleb could hear Marcus conferring with his men in low voices. They were deciding what to do, rush the mine, wait them out, or perhaps beginning to doubt their own certainty about what was possible. Then a different sound reached them, a deep rumbling, coming from the earth itself. The talisman around Elena's neck began to glow faintly, pulsing with a light that seemed to come from within the stone. "It's starting," Elena whispered. "The land knows what's happening. It's responding to the threat." The rumbling grew stronger. Caleb felt it through his boots, through the rock walls of the mine. Outside, he heard Marcus's men shouting in alarm as the ground began to shake. The shaking intensified. Outside the mine, Caleb could hear rocks sliding down the slope, men cursing and scrambling for safety. The talisman around Elena's neck blazed brighter now, its light filling the mine shaft with an otherworldly glow. Emma moved to Elena's side, steadying her as the older woman swayed. "What's happening?" "The bargain is reaching its end," Elena said, her voice strained. "The power that's bound me here for so long, it knows that change is coming. It's making a choice about who belongs on this land and who doesn't." Caleb watched as the ground outside the mine entrance split open, a crack running down the slope toward where Marcus and his men had taken cover. It wasn't a wide chasm, but it was clear a line of demarcation, a boundary the land itself was drawing. "Get back!" Marcus was shouting to his men. "Get back to the horses!" But the earth had other ideas. Trees groaned and shifted. Rocks that had been stable for centuries suddenly came loose, tumbling down toward the valley. Not in a killing avalanche, but in a clear message. This place was protected, and those who came with ill intent were not welcome. Elena pulled the talisman from around her neck. Her hands were shaking as she held it out to Emma. "Take it. The power recognizes you. It knows you're of Sarah's blood, of my blood. When you accept it, when you claim this land as your own, the binding will transfer." Emma hesitated. "What will happen to you?" "I'll be free," Elena said simply. "I'll age to what I should be, an old woman who's lived a very long life, but I'll be free to live whatever years remain to me without the weight of this bargain. And the power, the protection, will become yours to wield in a different form, not as a prison, but as a stewardship. You'll feel the land, know when it's threatened, be able to protect it in ways that don't require you to sacrifice your life to it." Elena pressed the talisman into Emma's palm and closed her granddaughter's fingers around it. "Say the words. Claim what's yours." Emma looked at Caleb. He nodded. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Emma held the talisman up, and it seemed to pulse in response to her touch. She took a deep breath and spoke clearly. "I am Emma Walsh, daughter of Sarah's line. I claim this land as my inheritance, my birthright, and my responsibility. I accept the stewardship that comes with it, and I promise to honor what it represents." The talisman flared brilliant white. The light poured from it like water, filling the mine, spilling out into the night. Caleb had to shield his eyes against its intensity. He heard Elena cry out, not in pain, but in release, like someone who'd been holding their breath for an impossible length of time. When the light faded, everything had changed. Elena had collapsed to her knees, but Emma was already there, holding her. In the span of those few seconds, Elena had aged, not to death, not to dust, but to her true years. Her face was lined now, her hair white instead of dark. She looked like a woman in her 70s or 80s, still strong, still vital, but finally mortal, and she was smiling through her tears. Outside, the shaking had stopped, but something else was happening. From the earth itself, from the crack that had split the ground, something was emerging, not gold, but documents old, preserved by the same power that had preserved Elena. Land deeds, claim papers, and a worn leather folder that looked like it had been waiting underground for over a century. Caleb stepped outside carefully and retrieved the folder. Inside were official documents signed by Silas Dalton himself, papers showing his illegal claim to the property, agreements with corrupt officials, and most damning of all, a handwritten confession he'd apparently hidden away, perhaps for blackmail purposes or his own twisted form of record-keeping. "I, Silas Dalton, do hereby record that Thomas Marsh met his end by my design, that I caused the collapse that killed him, intending to claim his land and the gold therein. May God forgive me, though I know he will not." The land had kept its secrets for over a century, and now it was releasing them at the moment they were most needed. Marcus Dalton appeared at the edge of the clearing, his face pale in the moonlight. He'd seen the light, felt the earth move, and now he could see the documents in Caleb's hands. "That's not possible," he whispered. "It's very possible," Caleb said. "It's the truth your family has been running from for generations. Your fortune, your reputation, your entire legacy, it's built on murder and theft. And now everyone is going to know it." Marcus looked from Caleb to Emma, who had emerged from the mine supporting Elena. The older woman looked frail now, but her eyes were sharp and clear. "I forgave your ancestor long ago," Elena said to Marcus, "not because he deserved it, but because hatred was too heavy a burden to carry for so long. But forgiveness doesn't mean there are no consequences. This land belongs to my family. It always has. And now the proof of that is written in the earth itself." Marcus's men had gathered behind him, but their guns were lowered now. They'd seen enough strange things tonight to make them wary of pressing their attack. The land itself had shown them they weren't welcome. Marcus looked at the documents, at Elena's transformed appearance, at Emma standing defiant with the glowing talisman still in her hand. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by the dawning realization that he'd lost not just this battle, but the entire war his family had been waging for 5 generations. "Keep your land," he said finally, his voice hollow. "Keep your gold. I want nothing more to do with this cursed place." He turned and walked away, his men following. They mounted their horses and rode down into the valley, their lanterns growing smaller until they disappeared entirely into the night. In the silence that followed, Emma helped Elena sit on a fallen log. The older woman, truly old, now looked up at the stars with wonder. "I'd forgotten," she said softly. "I'd forgotten how beautiful a simple night sky could be when you're not trapped beneath it." Caleb stood beside them, feeling the weight of what they'd accomplished. Justice after more than a century, freedom after impossible waiting, and family reunited across the span of generations. The night wind whispered through the pines, and for the first time in longer than anyone could remember, the valley rested easy. 3 months had passed since that night on the mountain. 3 months since the curse had broken, since Elena had finally been freed, since Emma had claimed her inheritance. The valley had settled into a new rhythm, one that felt both ancient and fresh. Caleb stood on the newly rebuilt porch of the cabin, watching the morning sun paint the meadow in shades of gold. He'd spent weeks repairing the damage from Marcus's forced entry, replacing the shattered door, fixing the broken shutters, reinforcing the foundation. It had been good work, the kind that occupied his hands and let his mind rest. Behind him, he heard the cabin door open. Elena emerged, moving more slowly than she once had, but with a contentment that made her somehow more present, more real. She was truly an old woman now, her white hair braided and pinned up, her face lined with the years she'd been denied. But her eyes were bright and alive in ways they hadn't been before. "Coffee's ready," she said, handing him a cup. "Emma's bringing fresh bread from town this afternoon, said she'd be here by 2. Caleb accepted the coffee gratefully. This had become their routine mornings together, sharing quiet conversation, planning the day's work. Elena had chosen to stay in the cabin, at least for now. It was the only home she truly knew, and with Emma's permission, she'd claimed one of the rooms Caleb had added to the structure. "I've been thinking," Elena said, settling into the rocking chair Caleb had built for her, "about what comes next." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm an old woman with no official existence in this modern world. No birth certificate that matches my appearance, no identification, no legal status. Emma's been trying to figure out the paperwork, but it's complicated." Caleb leaned against the porch railing. "We'll figure it out. There are ways. Emma has contacts, teachers, lawyers she knows from town. Someone will help." "I know you will." Elena smiled at him over her coffee cup. "You've already helped more than I had any right to ask. You and Emma both." A rider appeared on the trail, not Emma, but a messenger from town. He dismounted and handed Caleb an envelope marked with an official seal. "From the territorial courthouse," the messenger said. "They said it was important." Caleb tipped the man and waited until he'd ridden away before opening the envelope. Inside was a legal document, signed by a judge. He read it twice to make sure he understood, then handed it to Elena. "The Daltons have formally withdrawn their claim to this property," he said. "They've also issued a public statement acknowledging historical wrongs done by their family. Marcus has left the territory entirely, according to this." Elena read the document slowly, her finger tracing each line. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. "It's really over. It's really over." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, letting the reality of it settle in. 134 years of waiting, of binding, of protection had finally come to an end. The land was Emma's legally and spiritually. The gold remained in the ground where Emma had decided it should stay a resource for future generations if they needed it, but not something to be exploited for quick profit. Caleb's thoughts drifted to his father, to William Stone, and his decades-long commitment to keeping a promise. The silver compass rested in Caleb's pocket as always, but now, when he touched it, he felt connection rather than regret. His father had known what he was doing, sending Caleb here. Had known that his son needed purpose as much as Elena needed freedom. "Margaret would have liked you," Caleb said suddenly. Elena looked at him with gentle understanding. "She would have admired your strength, your patience, and she would have been proud of who you've become," Elena replied. "A man who keeps promises, a man who stands up for what's right, even when it's difficult." The sound of hoofbeats announced Emma's early arrival. She rode into the yard with saddlebags bulging with supplies and a wide smile on her face. Behind her on a lead rope was a second horse, a sturdy grey gelding. "I know I'm early," Emma called out, dismounting. "But I have news. The school board approved my request. I can teach part-time and live out here the rest of the week. That way I can help manage the property and spend time with," she hesitated, then smiled, "with my grandmother." Elena's face lit up. She rose from her chair and moved to embrace Emma. "You don't have to do that, child. I know your work in town is important." "So is this," Emma said firmly. "So is family. So is protecting this land the way you protected it for so long. It's my turn now, and I don't intend to do it alone." She turned to Caleb. "I brought you something." She led the grey gelding forward. "I know you've been making do with Sage, but this old boy needed a good home. He's steady, reliable, good in the mountains. Thought maybe you could use him for your guiding work." Caleb ran a hand along the horse's neck. The animal was well built, calm under his touch. "Emma, I can't accept." "You can and you will," Emma interrupted. "You've done more for us than we can ever repay. Let us do this small thing for you." He looked at these two women, one impossibly old, one young and strong, both connected by blood and circumstance, and now by choice. He thought about his cabin, the small house he'd built on the property with Emma's blessing, close enough to help when needed, but far enough to give everyone privacy. He thought about how he'd come here seeking solitude and found instead a family. Not the family he'd lost, but a family nonetheless. One built on shared purpose, mutual respect, and the understanding that some bonds transcend normal explanation. "Thank you," he said simply. They spent the afternoon together, the three of them working on various projects around the property. Emma wanted to plant a garden come spring. Elena suggested specific herbs she remembered from her youth, medicinal plants that would grow well at this elevation. Caleb planned out irrigation from the creek, a system that would water the garden without damaging the land. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, they gathered on the porch one more time. Emma had brought out her father's old guitar, and she played simple melodies while Elena hummed along with tunes she remembered from a century past. Caleb whittled a piece of wood, half listening, half lost in his own thoughts. The valley spread before them, golden in the late light. The same valley that had held Elena prisoner for so long now held her by choice. The same land that had been fought over for generations now rested peacefully in the hands of those who understood its value wasn't measured in gold, but in legacy and belonging. Caleb looked at the cabin door, the new door he'd built to replace the one the Daltons had shattered. It stood strong and straight, its wood fresh and clean, a proper threshold between past and future, between what had been and what could be. Elena followed his gaze and smiled. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything, for believing an impossible story, for helping an old woman find her way home to family." "I think we all found our way home," Caleb replied. The three of them sat together as evening came on, watching the stars emerge one by one above the mountains. They were an unlikely family, a mountain man who'd lost his way, an impossible woman who'd waited beyond all reason, and a school teacher who'd discovered she was heir to more than land and gold. But they were family nonetheless. And in this valley, on this land that had protected and been protected for so long, they'd found something precious, a place to belong, a purpose to serve, and the peace that comes from promises kept and justice finally done. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the scent of coming winter and the promise of spring beyond. And in the cabin that had stood for over a century, lights glowed warm against the gathering dark, a beacon of home in the wilderness, just as it had always been meant to be.